There are moments in life when you've tried everything. The affirmations, the prayers, the books, the endless searching. And still, something within you aches for peace. It's not that you've failed. It's that you've been looking in the noise for something that only exists in silence. Joel Goldsmith once said that a single moment of true awareness, even 3 minutes, can heal a lifetime of pain. Not because time has power, but because in that short, sacred space, you step out of the dream of separation and touch reality itself. This is not a technique. It's not a formula. It's an awakening, a remembering. In those 3 minutes, you stop reaching for God and realize that God has never been missing. The very presence you've been seeking, the very love you've been calling for, has been quietly breathing you all along. You see, healing does not happen when something outside of you changes. It happens when you wake up to the presence within you. The infinite doesn't need time to restore order. It needs only one thing, your stillness. Thousands have testified to this experience, not because of Joel Goldsmith's words, but because his silence became contagious. He invited others into that stillness, and in that presence, tumors dissolved, fear vanished, and hearts awakened. It's not mystical in the way the world imagines it. It's practical, immediate, available to every soul that dares to stop running and simply be still. So tonight, don't listen for information. Listen for silence. Don't try to learn. Allow yourself to remember. Because in the next few minutes, we're not going to speak about meditation. We're going to enter it. We're going to step into that timeless awareness that heals not by doing, but by being. And if you can stay with me for just 3 minutes of pure stillness, you may begin to understand why Joel Goldsmith said, "The presence that heals is already here." When Joel Goldsmith spoke of stillness, he wasn't referring to sitting quietly or controlling the mind. He was pointing toward something much deeper, a state of consciousness in which the human sense of effort dissolves and only the presence remains. In that moment, you are no longer trying to be spiritual, no longer seeking healing, no longer striving to connect. You are simply aware, and in that awareness, everything that appeared broken begins to restore itself. You see, most people approach healing as a kind of struggle. They believe that peace will come once the problem is solved. But Goldsmith's entire teaching turns that idea inside out. He said, when you touch the infinite, the problem ceases to exist, not because it was solved, but because you see there was never a problem to begin with. That is the power hidden in stillness. Stillness is not passive. It is not emptiness. It is an active, vibrant presence, the invisible rhythm of life that sustains everything. But we cannot sense it while our attention is scattered, while the mind is busy trying to manage outcomes. The stillness is always here, but it waits for you to stop moving long enough to notice it. Think of the ocean for a moment. When the surface is disturbed, you see only waves, turbulence, and chaos, but dive beneath even a little, and everything becomes calm, silent, vast. The ocean's depth was never disturbed, only the surface moved. The same is true of consciousness. The noise of the mind is the surface. The stillness underneath has never been touched by fear, sickness, or uncertainty. That is what Joel meant by touching the infinite. The moment you turn inward, away from the noise of reasoning, away from the impulse to fix, away from the anxious repetition of words, you begin to descend beneath the surface. You enter the depth of your own being where the presence lives, and there, healing happens spontaneously. We often think healing means changing the condition of the body or the world, but in truth, healing is the correction of perception, the dissolving of the false sense that we are separate from life. When that false sense disappears, harmony rushes in, because it was never absent. The 3-minute meditation works because for just those few moments, the veil of thought lifts and reality is revealed. You don't have to force this stillness. You can't make it happen through will or discipline. You only need to stop interfering. Sit quietly for a moment. Let the mind do what it will. Let thoughts come and go. Don't follow them. Don't fight them. Gradually, the mind exhausts itself, and in the space that opens up, you begin to feel something subtle, something alive, something peaceful but powerful. That is the living presence, the one Goldsmith called the Christ within. In that awareness, you realize something extraordinary. You have never been alone. You have never been powerless. You have never been cut off from God. You were only distracted, listening to the surface noise of the mind and mistaking it for yourself. Stillness brings you home. It returns you to the center where nothing needs to be added and nothing can be taken away. It is the place within you that existed before the problem appeared, before the fear began. That center is untouched by circumstance. It doesn't care whether your bank account is full or empty, whether your body feels strong or weak, whether the world seems peaceful or chaotic. It remains constant, eternal, and that constancy is what heals. Because healing is not the changing of form, it is the rediscovery of truth. The moment you are still, you see through illusion. You see that fear has no substance, that lack has no life of its own, that pain is not a power. It is only the echo of resistance. And when resistance ceases, when you no longer cling to the story or the symptom, the presence flows freely again. Goldsmith often said, God's grace is not something you bring down through prayer, it is something revealed through silence. In stillness, grace reveals itself, not as an event, but as awareness. You realize that this presence is the true healer, the invisible activity of love that needs no help, no command, no permission. The human mind can't understand how healing happens, and it doesn't need to. The infinite knows what to do the moment you stop trying to manage it. That is why 3 minutes are enough, because it is not the duration of meditation that matters, but the depth of surrender. In 3 minutes of pure stillness, more transformation can occur than in years of struggle. You are not calling for help. You are becoming aware of the help that has never left. You are not inviting God to come closer. You are waking up to the truth that there is no distance between you and the divine. And once you touch that space, you begin to understand that stillness is not the opposite of movement. It is the source of it. All harmony, creativity, and healing arise from that silent center. When you live from that awareness, your actions become graceful, your words carry peace, your very presence uplifts others. Because you are no longer acting as a personality, you are radiating as the presence itself. So the invitation is simple. Stop looking for healing outside yourself. Stop believing that peace is something to be gained. The peace you seek is already the foundation of your being. All you need to do is remove the veil of thought long enough to see it. When you practice this, when you enter those few minutes of silence each day, you begin to live differently. The storms of the world still come, but they no longer move you. You respond instead of reacting. You see with clarity instead of fear. You begin to live from presence instead of personality. And that is when you realize the power was never hidden from you, it was hidden by you beneath layers of noise, fear, and effort. Stillness was never absent, it was simply unnoticed. So take those 3 minutes, turn inward. Let the world go for a while. Let thought become quiet. Let the waves settle. And when the stillness appears, don't reach for it, don't analyze it, just rest in it. Let it hold you. Because in that stillness, you will feel the truth for yourself. That healing is not something you create, it is something you uncover. It was waiting for you all along. For in the silence where thought ends and awareness begins, all things are made whole. We've all been trained from birth to live in thought, to analyze, compare, judge, predict, and plan. The mind has become our constant companion, whispering to us from morning to night, interpreting everything we see. But thought is not awareness. It is a shadow of awareness, a movement upon the surface of consciousness. And as long as we remain entangled in that movement, we live in reaction rather than revelation. Goldsmith often reminded his students that the human mind cannot bring about spiritual realization. It can prepare the way, yes, but it cannot enter the kingdom. Because the kingdom is not reached through thinking, it is revealed in awareness. That's the sacred shift this meditation invites us into, the quiet transition from the noise of thought to the stillness of pure seeing. Thinking always divides, it says, this is good, that is bad. This is mine, that is yours. This is success, that is failure. It lives by contrast and comparison. Awareness, on the other hand, does not divide, it simply is. It observes the play of opposites without judgment. In that impartial seeing there is peace, because awareness has no agenda. It doesn't need the world to change in order to rest. It simply beholds what is, and in that beholding, all resistance dissolves. That's why Joel would say that the only thing standing between us and harmony is the belief that our thoughts are real. The moment we stop identifying with them, the moment we see them as passing clouds, we awaken to the sky that was always there. The clouds of thought do not change the sky, they only obscure it temporarily. In meditation, you are not trying to control the clouds. You are remembering that you are the sky. The shift from thinking to awareness is not a doing, it's an allowing. It's the quiet recognition that you are not the thinker, you are the witness of thought. The mind may continue to speak, but you no longer answer. You watch its movement the way you might watch leaves drift down a river. They come, they go, but they do not disturb the current, and in that simple recognition, I am aware of this thought, something profound begins to happen. You feel space open up inside you. The tightness, the contraction that comes from believing every thought starts to loosen. You begin to feel something deeper than the stream of words. An underlying stillness that was there before the thought arose and will remain after it fades. That stillness is the presence. It is not something you create. It is what remains when thought becomes silent. And that presence carries within it a healing power that thought can never touch, because thought operates in time, in past and future, but presence lives only in the now. Healing, peace, and grace can only be experienced here, in this moment. When you live in thinking, you live in separation. You see yourself as a me struggling in a world of others. But in awareness, that sense of me begins to dissolve. The boundary softens. You realize that awareness is not personal, it is universal. It doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. You are not a separate consciousness having an experience. You are the infinite experiencing itself through the form you call. That realization changes everything. Because once you see that awareness is what you are, not what you do, you stop trying to fix yourself. You stop trying to become spiritual, enlightened, or healed. All of those are movements of thought. Instead, you begin to rest in awareness and let life do the healing. You realize that your only real responsibility is to remain conscious, to stay awake, to stay present. Joel Goldsmith described this as the activity of the Christ in individual consciousness. It is not a person or a power that you summon. It is the awareness itself that brings harmony wherever it is recognized. When you are still and aware, you become a transparency for that presence. And through you, that presence begins to act, not through effort, but through grace. The world will tell you that progress is measured by how much you think, how much you plan, how much you achieve. But in spiritual life, progress is measured by how silent you can become while remaining fully awake. Not asleep, awake, alert, and still. The paradox is that the less you think, the more clearly you see. The more you surrender, the more power flows through you, because you have stopped blocking it with your opinions, your doubts, your fears, and your constant interpretations. To move from thinking to awareness is to move from shadow to light, from effort to ease, from resistance to flow. You begin to sense that the presence, the same one that spins the stars and beats your heart, is doing everything. You are being lived. You are being breathed. You are being guided by a wisdom infinitely greater than the human intellect. And when you trust that, when you allow awareness to take the lead, life begins to unfold with a quiet precision that defies understanding. Situations resolve themselves. People come and go in perfect timing. Healing takes place, not because you willed it, but because you stopped interfering. You let the divine intelligence do what it was always doing. It's important to remember, awareness doesn't fix problems. It dissolves the illusion that there was ever a problem to begin with. The more you rest in that space, the lighter everything becomes. You see that the body, the world, and even your own story are movements within awareness, like waves upon the ocean. They rise and fall, but the ocean remains untouched. So in your meditation, in that 3-minute sacred pause, don't try to silence the mind, let it be. Don't chase after awareness, you are already it. The shift happens naturally when you stop looking for it. The very act of noticing thought without following it is the beginning of awakening. And when awareness becomes your home, when you no longer reach outward for peace, something extraordinary occurs. Everything you once sought begins to find you. Because grace flows wherever stillness abides. So right now, take a breath. Don't think about it, just be aware of it. Feel the aliveness in this moment, the quiet hum of existence that asks for nothing and gives everything. That is the presence. That is the real you. And when you learn to rest in that awareness, you discover that healing was never a future event. It was the eternal nature of your being, waiting for you to wake up. There comes a moment in this inner work when you realize that you are no longer trying to make something happen. You are no longer attempting to summon healing, peace, or harmony. You are simply being still, allowing something beyond your comprehension to move through you. And in that silent allowing, the invisible presence, the one Joel Goldsmith spoke of so often, begins to reveal itself as the true actor, the true healer, the true intelligence behind all existence. Goldsmith would often say, "You are not the healer, you are the transparency through which healing appears." That single statement, if deeply understood, can dissolve years of struggle. It means that the healing presence is not something you need to create, control, or understand. It is already functioning, eternally whole, eternally complete. The only reason it seems absent is because the human mind insists on taking its place, trying to think, fix, reason, and direct what only the infinite can do. This is the great paradox of the spiritual path. As long as you try to use God, you cannot experience God. Because the infinite cannot be used, it can only be revealed. And revelation requires surrender. The moment you stop claiming power, the presence reveals itself as the only power. You might ask, what is this presence? How do I know when it's here? The truth is, it's always here. It doesn't come or go. What changes is your awareness of it. The presence is not an energy that descends upon you. It is the ground of being itself. It is the intelligence that animates every heartbeat, the silence that listens behind every sound, the light of awareness in which every thought appears. It cannot be seen with the eyes or grasped by the mind, but it can be felt unmistakably when the inner noise subsides. Think of a radio. The broadcast is always transmitting, but unless the receiver is tuned correctly, you won't hear the signal. The problem isn't with the broadcast, it's with the interference. Our anxious thinking, our fears, our desires all act as static that blurs the channel. Meditation, or true prayer as Goldsmith described it, is the act of tuning in, not by effort but by quiet recognition, the awareness that says, "Be still, the presence is here." And once that awareness dawns, you begin to sense a quiet, radiant intelligence moving within and around you. You can't define it, but you can feel its activity. It brings harmony to the body, clarity to the mind, and peace to the heart. It arranges circumstances without your interference. It is the same invisible order that causes the planets to move in silence, the same law that brings balance to all life. That is the presence. The greatest mistake we make is believing that healing must happen to us, as if we are outside the flow of this presence. But in truth, the presence is what we are. Healing is not something added, it is the unveiling of what has never been broken. The presence doesn't fix, it reveals wholeness. It doesn't fight darkness, it simply shines. That's why Joel Goldsmith insisted that you never pray for healing. You don't ask the presence to do something. You acknowledge that it already is. You rest in that acknowledgement until it becomes your consciousness. And as you rest there, the visible effect of that awareness begins to appear. Pain softens, confusion clears, fear dissolves. You haven't changed the world, you've changed your perception of it. This understanding goes beyond belief. Belief operates in duality. It says, "I believe in something outside myself." Awareness knows no such division. It recognizes that the healer, the one healed, and the healing itself are one and the same. When that recognition becomes real, the entire drama of separation begins to fade. There is only one life, one power, one presence expressing itself through infinite form. The presence does not need time. It does not need ritual or repetition. It needs only recognition. In the instant you become still enough to feel its reality, healing has already begun, not because the condition changed, but because your awareness shifted from illusion to truth. The outer picture eventually conforms to that shift, because the world is nothing more than consciousness externalized. Joel Goldsmith often compared this to light entering a dark room. The moment light appears, darkness has no argument, no struggle, it simply vanishes. The presence works in the same way. It doesn't need to remove error or fight disease. It simply reveals that only the light has ever been real. The instant you recognize this, you stop fighting and begin resting in trust. And yet, this is not passive resignation. It's not about ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It's a higher kind of activity, the activity of awareness. You remain alert, awake, receptive. You allow the presence to think through you, speak through you, act through you. The ego steps aside, and life begins to unfold with effortless harmony. If you truly want to experience this, begin with humility. Sit quietly and say inwardly, "I of mine own self can do nothing," not as an act of weakness, but as an opening to the infinite. Then listen, not for words, not for signs, but for silence. In that silence, you will begin to feel something immeasurable. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstance, a strength that doesn't rely on control. That is the invisible presence announcing itself. It may come as warmth, as stillness, as a soft expansion in the heart, or it may come with no feeling at all, only a deep knowing that all is well. Don't analyze it, don't try to hold it. Just recognize it and let it be. The more you trust that invisible activity, the more visible its harmony becomes in your life. And that is why thousands who practice this 3-minute meditation testified to miracles. Not because the meditation had power, but because they finally stopped resisting the power that was already here. You see, healing is not a result of the presence acting upon you. Healing is the presence being revealed as you. The you that struggles, fears, and seeks disappears in that revelation, and what remains is the infinite calm of pure being. The mind will never understand this, and it doesn't need to. The presence does not require your intellect, it requires your stillness. It needs only your willingness to let go of control and trust the invisible. So let this become your practice, not asking, not demanding, but resting in the quiet assurance that the invisible presence is the only reality. It knows what to do. It has never failed. And when you realize this, when you stop striving and start surrendering, you'll feel a deep simplicity arise within you. A peace that whispers "Al as well, because God is." There comes a stage on the path, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you begin to see that the very thing you've been trying to perfect, protect, or purify is the thing standing in the way of realization. That thing is the personal self that says, "I must heal, I must meditate, I must become enlightened." But Joel Goldsmith said it simply, the personal sense of self is the only barrier to truth. And yet this is the hardest idea for the mind to release, because the mind itself is that personal sense. It clings to its identity, its story, its opinions, and its history as if they were life itself. But what if all of that is only an image, a mask covering the infinite? The personal self is a beautiful illusion. It allows us to experience life as someone. But in spiritual realization, it becomes the veil that hides our true being. The moment you take yourself to be a separate individual trying to reach God, you've already stepped out of the truth that you are God's expression. The human is the dream. Awareness is the awakening. When you say, I am tired, I am sick, I am afraid, notice what you're doing. You're attaching the infinite, I am, the name of God itself, to a temporary condition. And every time you do that, you imprison the infinite within the limits of your thought. But the truth is, the real, the divine self, never tires, never suffers, never fears. It simply is. Letting go of the personal self does not mean rejecting your humanity. It means seeing through it. It means recognizing that the person you think you are, with its history, its desires, its regrets, is a projection on the screen of awareness. It has no independent life. When you stop feeding it with identification, it begins to dissolve naturally, revealing the boundless presence behind it. This is what Goldsmith meant when he said, "You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are the infinite appearing as a human being." The personal self is the mask. The infinite is the face behind it. The personal mind believes it must achieve something, that it must work harder, pray longer, or think purer thoughts to become worthy of peace. But awareness knows that peace was never lost. The effort itself is the problem. The more you try to become, the more you reinforce the illusion that you are something other than what already is. So how do you let go? You begin by noticing. Notice every time you refer to yourself as a person trying to reach a goal. Notice the tension that arises with that identification. Then pause, not to correct it, but to see it clearly. Awareness itself does the dissolving. The moment you see the illusion for what it is, you are no longer trapped by it. It's like mist in the morning. You don't fight the mist. You wait for the sun to rise. The light reveals that there was never anything solid to battle against. In the same way, as awareness grows, the personal self simply fades into transparency. You don't lose anything real. You lose only the burden of pretending to be separate. Letting go of the personal self is also the key to true humility. Because when you no longer claim ownership of power, wisdom, or achievement, you become a clear channel for the infinite to express itself. You realize that every breath, every thought, every heartbeat is the activity of God, not yours. This is not self-denial. It is self-recognition. You are not nothing. You are no thing. You are the invisible awareness in which all things appear and disappear. When you rest in that realization, life flows without resistance. You no longer take credit for what goes right or blame for what goes wrong. You begin to live in the rhythm of grace. And this is where healing becomes effortless. As long as there is a me trying to heal, there is tension, striving, fear of failure. But when the dissolves, healing happens naturally, because the infinite presence, which knows only harmony, is free to express itself without interference. Joel would often remind his students, "I do not heal anyone. I do not even heal myself. I simply bear witness to the activity of God as the only reality." That is the posture of the impersonal consciousness. It doesn't attempt to fix, it recognizes wholeness. It doesn't command, it allows. And in that allowing, the body responds, relationships harmonize, and outer conditions begin to reflect the inner order. Why? Because the world we experience is always a mirror of our state of consciousness. The personal self projects conflict, awareness reflects peace. The moment you withdraw belief from the personal self, the mirror clears and life begins to show its divine pattern. But make no mistake, this letting go is not a one-time act. It's a continual surrender, moment by moment. Every time you feel fear, pause and remember, this fear belongs to the personal sense of self, not to the I that I truly am. Every time you feel offended, hurt, or proud, remember, this reaction is the mask, not the face. Over time, the identification weakens. You begin to watch life unfold without clinging or resisting. You speak, act, and feel, but without the weight of me and mine. You discover that freedom is not found in changing the world, but in seeing through the one who thinks it must. And when you live this way, something miraculous happens. You become transparent. People feel peace in your presence without knowing why. The invisible radiance of the infinite shines through your words, your silence, your very being. You no longer try to be spiritual. You simply are. That's what Goldsmith called living as the Christ. Not a person elevated above others, but consciousness unveiled, the infinite recognized as the only self there is. So the invitation is not to destroy the personal self, but to outgrow it, to stop mistaking the costume for the actor, the dream for the dreamer. When you do, you realize that nothing was ever outside of you, and nothing was ever missing. Letting go of the personal self doesn't take effort. It takes recognition. You don't have to fight for freedom. You only have to stop pretending to be bound. And when that pretense drops away, when the personal fades and the infinite shines through, you understand why Goldsmith said, "The greatest prayer ever uttered is silence, for in that silence, there is no personal self left to speak, only the presence left to live." There comes a moment in every sincere seeker's path when the striving ends, not because one has achieved something extraordinary, but because one finally recognizes that all striving was unnecessary from the beginning. What takes its place is a quiet awareness, a natural rhythm that carries you effortlessly, silently, through every circumstance. Joel Goldsmith called this living in the flow of grace. Grace, he would say, is not a reward, not a divine favor handed out to those who earn it through good works or perfect prayers. Grace is the nature of God's being. It is the spontaneous outpouring of divine life expressing itself as harmony, abundance, and peace. It is what remains when the personal sense of self steps aside. You don't invoke it, you uncover it. To live in the flow of grace is to live without resistance. It is to recognize that there is an infinite intelligence at work, not out there but within the very fabric of your being. It knows when to move, when to rest, when to speak, when to remain silent. It doesn't depend on human will, it transcends it. And yet, it includes every breath, every step, every thought as part of its perfect orchestration. The human mind, in its ignorance, believes it must plan, control, and manipulate circumstances to secure safety or success. It exhausts itself trying to fix life. But the more you live from that place, the more tangled you become in the web of cause and effect. Grace cannot flow through a mind that insists on steering the river. Joel used to remind his students, you cannot add to the infinite, nor can you improve upon perfection. And yet, we try, endlessly. We pray as though God were absent. We act as though life were chaotic. We struggle as though peace were something to be built rather than discovered. But when you begin to see the futility of that struggle, something inside you relaxes. You stop trying to make the current go your way and instead you begin to trust its direction. That trust is not blind. It is born out of realization, a knowing that behind every visible event, there is an invisible order. When the outer world appears chaotic, grace is still moving quietly beneath the surface. It is the intelligence that turns seeds into trees, night into day, and pain into transformation. It does not need your permission to function. It needs only your recognition. When you begin to live in that awareness, life becomes a continuous unfolding rather than a series of crises. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? Instead, you begin to sense, this too is part of the unfolding. The mind may not always understand, but the heart begins to trust. Living in the flow of grace does not mean you become passive or detached. It means that your actions arise from inner stillness rather than fear or desire. You act because the impulse to act comes naturally, not because you are trying to force an outcome. In that way, you participate in life without being bound by it. You might notice that when you live from that place, doors open without effort. The right people appear, the right opportunities align, and even challenges begin to serve a higher purpose. It's not that you manipulate these events. It's that you have aligned yourself with the invisible rhythm that governs all of existence. The paradox of grace is that it requires nothing but cannot enter where there is grasping. When the mind releases its agenda, when the heart softens its defenses, grace fills the space. It was always there, waiting for you to stop resisting. Goldsmith often said that the greatest spiritual practice is to be still and know. Be still, not merely in body, but in thought, in expectation, in fear. Be still until the mind's noise quiets enough for you to sense the underlying presence. In that stillness, you begin to feel something subtle but unmistakable, an inner current that carries you. That current is the flow of grace. It doesn't speak in words, but it guides with clarity. It doesn't announce itself with emotion, but it fills you with peace. When you're in tune with it, even the smallest actions, a conversation, a walk, a simple act of kindness, feel infused with meaning. You realize that everything, no matter how ordinary, is sacred when done in the awareness of grace. And yet, living in grace doesn't mean life becomes free of difficulty. Storms may still come, but you no longer identify with the storm. You know you are the sky, not the weather. The waves may rise, but you are no longer tossed about. You are the ocean itself. The flow of grace doesn't remove challenge. It reveals that challenge has no power to disturb what is real. This is why healing, in Goldsmith's understanding, was never about changing the outer condition. It was about remembering the inner truth, that harmony is the natural state of being. When you rest in that awareness, the body, the mind, and the circumstances begin to realign themselves spontaneously. Healing is not an achievement, it is an unveiling. There is an extraordinary freedom in realizing that you no longer have to make life work. You simply allow life to express itself through you. You become an instrument, a transparency for the infinite to flow through. And in that transparency, everything you once sought begins to appear naturally, not as possessions but as reflections of the inner order you now embody. The secret is surrender, not a weak surrender, but the kind born of understanding, the kind that says, I no longer need to push the river because I have seen that I am the river. That realization marks the beginning of peace. When you live in the flow of grace, you find that life has its own timing. Sometimes it moves swiftly, sometimes it pauses. But whether the current is calm or strong, you begin to sense that it is always carrying you exactly where you need to be. You stop asking for things to change, and instead you begin to say, let thy will be done. Not as resignation, but as recognition that the divine will and my own are one. And in that realization, the struggle ends. The burden of control falls away. You become as effortless as sunlight, as spontaneous as breath. Life begins to live itself through you. That is the flow of grace, the silent current beneath all things, the presence that has never left you, and never will. When you finally surrender to it, you understand what Goldsmith meant when he said, where the Spirit of the Lord is realized, there is liberty. And that liberty is not gained, it is revealed. There comes a point in every true meditation when words fall away. Thought slows, expectation fades, and what remains is not emptiness, but presence. It's here, in this living silence, that healing happens. Not because you asked for it, not because you visualized it, but because, for one brief moment, you stopped standing in the way of reality. Joel Goldsmith understood that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of God. It is not passive, nor is it simply quiet. It is the still awareness beneath all motion, the peace that holds even chaos in its embrace. When the mind falls silent, the divine has room to reveal itself. And in that revelation, every false appearance begins to dissolve, just as darkness disappears when light is allowed to shine. You see, healing is not something added to us, it is what naturally unfolds when illusion is removed. Every fear, every disease, every form of lack is a manifestation of one thing, separation. We imagine ourselves apart from life, apart from source, apart from love itself. And as long as we live in that illusion, we experience its consequences, tension, anxiety, and suffering. But when you enter the silence, even for a moment, that illusion loses its power. In the stillness, there is no you, trying to fix something. There is only awareness, infinite and whole. The body may still have pain, the mind may still remember the problem, but the deeper self, the one that watches, the one that is untouched, begins to emerge. That is the point of healing. It doesn't always start in the body, it starts in consciousness. Joel used to say, when you are still enough, the presence of God announces itself. It's not dramatic, there's no thunder, no miracle in the worldly sense. Often it comes as a gentle realization, a feeling that all is well, that you are never outside of harmony, never truly in danger. That realization alone can shift the entire vibration of your being. Cells respond, emotions release, burdens lift. Healing unfolds because you have returned to the truth of your own being. But this silence cannot be forced. The harder you try to be silent, the louder the mind becomes. The silence Joel spoke of is not something you achieve, it's something you allow. It's what remains when the inner noise exhausts itself. When you stop searching, stop demanding, stop pleading, when you simply sit, breathe, and listen, the listening itself becomes the prayer. Many people ask, what should I do in that silence? The answer is nothing. The silence itself is the doing. In that moment you are not the healer, you are being healed. You are not the thinker, you are being thought. The presence is active, though it appears still. It knows what to restore, what to release, what to renew. You only need to stay open, receptive, non-resistant. Think of a pond after the wind has passed. When the surface is still, it reflects the sky perfectly. But when disturbed, even slightly, the reflection is broken. Our consciousness works in the same way. When the mind is agitated by fear or desire, the infinite cannot be seen clearly. But when we enter the stillness, the reflection becomes pure again. And what we call healing is simply the restoration of that reflection to its natural clarity. Sometimes, in this silence, insight arises. You may suddenly understand the root of a problem, or feel a new compassion for someone you once resented. But often, nothing at all seems to happen. Do not mistake that for failure. In the silence, the work of spirit is hidden. The shift occurs below the surface of thought, and later, as life unfolds, you begin to notice that something subtle has changed. The tension is gone, the fear has no voice, the weight you carried quietly disappears. That is the evidence of true healing. The moment of silence is sacred because it dissolves the illusion of duality. There is no healer and patient, no subject and object, no problem and solution. There is only oneness. That oneness does not need to act, it simply is. And in its ness, all things are restored to harmony. Goldsmith's meditations were rarely long. Sometimes he would sit with a student for only 2 or 3 minutes, without speaking. But in that brief silence, the entire atmosphere would change. People would feel an energy, a peace, something beyond words. He wasn't doing anything, he was resting in the awareness of the infinite. And in that awareness, everyone present felt lifted into the same vibration. The silence became contagious. That is the invitation of this 3-minute meditation, to stop seeking and start being, to let the presence reveal itself, to realize that healing is not the correction of a condition, but the recognition of wholeness. When you touch that silence, even for a heartbeat, you begin to sense the eternal rhythm that has always carried you. Try it for yourself. The next time fear arises, don't fight it. Don't affirm it away. Simply become still. Let the breath settle. Feel the weight of your body on the chair. Withdraw your attention from the problem and rest in awareness itself. Notice that beneath the thoughts and sensations, there is something constant, an unbroken peace. Stay there, trust it. That is the presence that heals. And understand this, you don't have to maintain that state all day. Even a few seconds of genuine silence can shift an entire situation, because it reconnects you to the source from which all harmony flows. The mind may return to noise, the world may continue its motion, but now you know where to find the still point within it all. The silence becomes a sanctuary you can return to any time, anywhere, in a crowded street, in a moment of fear, in the middle of conversation. You begin to carry the presence with you not as a practice, but as your natural state of being. And when you live from that state, healing is no longer an event. It becomes a way of life. Ultimately, the silence is not something you enter, it is what you are. It was never absent. The mind created noise around it, and meditation is simply the art of remembering what has always been true. You are the stillness. You are the awareness in which all motion appears and disappears. So the next time you sit in meditation, don't try to reach God. Don't wait for an experience. Just be silent. Be aware. Be in that being. Let the words of Goldsmith echo quietly in your soul. Be still and know. The place where you stand is holy ground. And now, as we come to the close of this journey, let's pause for just a moment and reflect on what has truly taken place. You have not simply listened to words. You have been led gently toward the silence behind the words. The words were only a bridge, a way of pointing you back to yourself, to that still center where healing is not created but discovered. We began by exploring the power hidden in stillness. That moment when the mind stops struggling and you feel something larger than yourself take over. Then we saw how the presence that heals is not far away. It is the very essence of your being. Every breath, every thought, every quiet realization is already infused with that divine intelligence. We learned that the true nature of prayer is not asking, but listening. It's not an act of reaching outward, but of awakening inward, to the ever-present I. And as you awaken, you realize that grace was never absent, only unnoticed. When you enter that flow of grace, life ceases to feel like a battlefield. It becomes a living symphony. Each moment perfectly placed, each event serving a purpose that only the infinite could compose. You no longer resist the rhythm, you allow it to carry you. And finally, in the silence, that sacred moment when the self dissolves and only awareness remains, healing becomes inevitable. Because the one who suffered, the one who feared, the one who prayed for deliverance, was never the real you. The real you is always whole, untouched, eternal. What you call healing is simply the recognition of that truth. It's the moment when the clouds of thought part, and the sun that never stops shining is seen again. So now, as you sit here, take a slow breath. Don't reach for meaning. Don't analyze, just be. Feel the simplicity of this moment. Feel the aliveness that is breathing you. That awareness, that quiet eye, is the presence Goldsmith spoke of. It is your healer, your peace, your supply, your freedom. You don't need 3 hours. You don't even need 3 minutes. You need only one instant of recognition, one instant of awareness so pure that all illusion falls away. And in that instant, you will know what Goldsmith meant when he said, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is realized, there is liberty." Carry that awareness with you as you go. Let your days become meditations, not of words, but of consciousness. Let every encounter, every moment, every breath remind you of the presence that lives through you, as you. And when fear comes, because it will, meet it not with resistance, but with remembrance, return to the stillness. Feel again that invisible rhythm moving within you. And quietly, without effort, whisper inwardly, "Peace, be still." That is the whole teaching. That is the healing prayer. That is the eternal meditation that Goldsmith lived and left for us. And in that silence, beyond all striving, you will discover what countless souls before you have testified, that God is not found through words, but through awareness. And that awareness right now is you.